Well, hello! Winter's starting to get bad here. It's getting tricky to fly outdoors. So I thought I might try something I could fly indoors. And I'm still not sure if it's too big or not, but it's this. I've got the King Kong ET100, which has come from Gearbest for review, so thanks for them. Now, once again, King Kong's supplying these things in these nice little carry cases. You might notice down here, there is several strips of tape. Why is that? Now, I mentioned this for you guys in the UK, and it's the horror of receiving a yodel notice, especially when it says things like side gate. This meant, from my point of view, this came probably safely all the way from China, and then the delivery driver locally threw it over a 6-foot fence onto a concrete patio slab, and of course it came down with a whack, and this got split all the way down, which is a shame, but what can you do? Yodel. Ugh. Anyway, minor point, because the actual quad itself is safe. So in the box we have this. It's a little 100mm quad. It's got these really tough surrounded sides here. So I thought, you know, you could fly it inside, you could bump into stuff, it wouldn't matter. At the same point, 100mm is pretty big compared to, let's have a look. This is an old broken one, but this is the normal 68mm thing that you'd fly indoors. This is the sort of tiny whoop size, and you can see there's quite a size increase, and you know, my house isn't big. This is also running on 2S, which is going to make it a little bit more feisty, but I'm thinking, you know, I should be able to set up a decent profile that gives it be a little bit more gentle in the house perhaps, and then have an outside profile, because it certainly won't have any problems outside. So this is the bind and fly model. It comes installed with a FrSky XM, which is a pretty decent receiver, and it's got your normal stack of like 10 amp ESC boards and flight controller. I don't think King Kong do the omnibus type. They tend to go with a Pico board, which doesn't contain the OSD. I think that's probably the same for this one. I haven't checked yet, and I haven't looked at the camera or anything yet, but the motors are quite a bit smaller than the normal. These are 1103 7800s, so they should be good for being able to change speed quite rapidly. These quite small triplates. I'm thinking it should be okay indoors. Let's hope so. So the other things you get in the box, this nice foam insert here for putting batteries in. It's quite interesting, this one. It's like the battery that came with it barely fits in the box. It is a 450 milliamp 2S, but it's a sort of stretched one. So long and thin, which will fit in there. Although I think my normal 450, 550 ones of these, which are sort of more rectangular, which I fly things like the Auroras and those sort, should fit in okay. They also give you this little box here. In the little box is the manual for the FrSky XM, a couple of pairs of spare props, a prop removal tool, a USB cable, some fairly good instructions for the quad itself, especially if you go back into Betaflight and do any changes. So that's pretty good. Well, I mean, it's just about ready to fly, so let's check it out and get it flying, shall we? Okay, so setup time, and one of the first issues you might find is, hey, how do I bind it? Is this the bind button here? Or in fact there? No, this is actually the VTX, just to show how this works very quickly. If you plug a battery in, you will see lights flashing. That is a blue and green. And pressing the button will change the sequence, and then you get this little list which shows what the colour combinations mean in terms of one of the 16 channels. Now, getting into bind is not too dissimilar to what you have to do to actually get into it on Betaflight. You've got the USB port just here. However, if you use a regular micro USB cable like this one, it's too big. It's not going in there. However, in the box they provided this super little thin cable. Look at that. Sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? Problem? Still doesn't fit. It won't go in there. It's still too big for this hole. I'm guessing, because these are a range of these. This is the ET100 as 100mm. There's also a 115 and 125. They might be okay for the other ones, but they're not okay for this. So to do both of these things, we need to take this protective cover off, which we do through these 3 screws here, here and here, which is no hassle at all. And it comes off like this, although not quite all the way, because that way this dipole stays there. This then gives access to the tiny bind button here, and of course the USB on this little Pico Blocks board here. So this is not great orientation of the little XM FrSky antenna. It's just going along the quad there, creating a null point at the end, so this could reduce the range a bit, but it's not exactly like a long range quad, is it? So just a few little things to say in Betaflight here, and you can see it is indeed the Pico board, so no OSD is going to be here. Setup's fairly normal. It's got UART3 set to serial, and that ties in with, as you'd expect here, the S-Bus receiver. It's set to 4K, which I guess is okay. The weird thing here is this was set to multi-shot. Now everything I've read about this says it supports DShot. So what I did, I changed it to DShot and I tried to fire the quad up and only 3 motors would fire up. This rang a bell with me, and thinking about it, the last King Kong product I reviewed was called the King Kong, I think it was the Fly 130. This also had a Pico board, and I noticed that was set to multi-shot, and when I set it to D-shot, only 2 of the motors fired up. So it's getting better. Hopefully next time round all the motors will actually fire when you use D-shot. So yeah, that's weird. It's a bit of a pain. It's, you know, not the worst thing in the world. Multi-shot works fine. I calibrated the ESCs and it all looks fine, but you know, if it says D-shot supported, then why doesn't it work? The only other thing I did of note was to set my default pairs with the super rate of 8 or 0.8, slightly higher, and in modes I've put in angle. I think angle is quite a useful one for indoors where you're sort of trying to be careful around stuff. Normally I'm sort of very against it and say you should be using manual or acro for doing everything. A little bit different indoors. I'm prepared to give a little there. Okay, so off we go with an indoor flight, and I'm starting off in angle here because it's quite big for indoors, and I've only got a little house. And if you saw the dog in jail, she's in her pen there. It's because this is a little bit big and a little bit heavier. I didn't want to get bashed by it, so she's having a temporary forced rest. But actually, this is not bad at all. I mean, it makes a lot of noise and it blows a lot of air around. So if you've got any bits of paper and stuff sitting around where you're flying at home, they're all going to go flying. But it's actually very controllable, so not a problem there at all. Even getting through doorways and stuff, not particularly a problem. I'm actually quite impressed with it. It's a little bit of a peculiar view this with the prop guards in view all the time. It kind of puts context into where you are and what's happening, but it certainly is an odd one. I have got so used to having an OSD on screen, even with little micro quads, that whenever you don't have it, you kind of miss it and you're like, well, what is my voltage? How long have I been flying? Those sort of questions. But the VTX and the camera on this really hold up quite well. It's just a little 25 milliwatt system. You can actually change it over to 100 milliwatts by doing a solder connection, but it seems fine. I mean, for flying around a house, it's going through walls, it's going, you know, upstairs instead of whilst I'm downstairs. So I think it's coping quite well, and there's minimal amounts of breakup here. I thought I'd test out these prop guards accidentally at first, just by trying to get a shot of myself in the mirror, which I managed to get a nice bounce on. So let's try that again on purpose this time. Yep, bounce, bounce. They are pretty tough. There's no distortion in these. They just let you bounce off thing. This seems different to me than the little sort of 68mm tiny whoop style things, which tend to react a lot more to getting hit on stuff. With this, I felt you could kind of just bully your way through things if you needed to. Just have a bounce along and keep going. Going through this chair leg here, this is where the prop guards came into their own. I could just kind of back out without worrying about anything getting hit, pick it up again and just bash my way through the chair. So on my second battery, I got rid of angle mode and tried flying in acro. This is with my 0.8 super rate, which I'm thinking in retrospect is probably a bit too high. I did talk about actually doing a special rate for indoors, and I think maybe having the 0.7 default rates in roll and pitch, and perhaps keeping the 0.8 on the yaw, because it's really handy to be able to spin around really quickly indoors to get out of those tight gaps would be a much better idea. I say that now. At the time, of course, I forgot, and this is why we've got kind of slightly, in some cases, wobbly stuff going on. There's a slight tendency, especially after bouncing off something, to overcorrect a couple of ways. But the yaw was really nice to be able to whip the quad right around like this. So as the rain finally changed from heavy to quite light, I thought I'd just open up this door, see how it feels to fly a bit of outdoors and then a bit of indoors. And the answer is it feels pretty good. Because it's a bit bigger and a bit more powerful, it doesn't get blown around with the little breeze outside. It doesn't stop me crashing into stuff though. But again, it just bounces off and I kind of force my way out again and carry on. That bit's pretty good. Now I thought I'd try a roll here, but that was really slow. I was thinking a bit nervous about the amount of space I've got in my garden, where I didn't want to disappear into my neighbours or onto the road. So perhaps a little bit of space is a more appropriate thing to do to try it. But yeah, this is good fun. Where my house is like maybe a little bit small for doing this, going in and out is definitely good fun. You can really get a lot more speed going outside and doing it. We eventually got that roll. It really is not like your normal microquad. It's got some weight behind it, and it doesn't really like its own prop wash much at all. But yeah, this was good fun. This is the best type of indoor flying, where it's like a bit of indoors, a bit of outdoors, and then back indoors. Just varies it up a little bit. So I decided to take it for a proper outdoor flight, and handily enough, my wife came with me as we were walking the dog, so she managed to capture some of these external shots, which was quite nice. And as I discovered in the garden, going outside is not a problem. It's big enough so it doesn't have a particular problem with the wind. It doesn't get blown around too much. At the same time though, for its size, it is reasonably heavy, and so it doesn't feel quite as nippy. Now, I would like to say, I was just showing off because my wife is there. The reality is it does fly a little bit different to my other microquads. There's a little bit weird in some of the manoeuvres and how it goes, which just take a little bit more figuring out, and that's why I managed to crash multiple times. I'd say it feels a little bit sluggish when going along. This could be because the motors are much smaller. It could be because what we've got is a pretty fixed straight camera angle, so without the ability to really up that angle, I can't lean it forwards enough to get any actual speed going. Obviously, because of these quite large prop guards, it's going to be a bit more of like a wind block effect, but at the same time it does okay. It's more of a pottering around than actually flying around with great speed, as some of the other micros does. At the same time, I felt it looked slow from my FPV view. When I look at the exterior view, it seems quite nippy. It chugs along at a good old pace there. I do notice when I do a roll or a flip or something, I almost come to a stop, and I think this is about it acting like a wind block. That inertia doesn't carry forwards, and we're not going fast enough anyway to carry much inertia, so you kind of you pop up to do a quick flip and roll, and then you kind of find yourself stopped and you have to start again. Nevertheless, very capable, and the fact it had these prop guards and it had a fully covered body meant in this really very wet, muddy field, when I did go down, I just picked it up, I pulled the grass out of the props, and nothing else bad happened. I gave the camera lens a bit of a wipe, and that was it. So from that point of view, I quite liked it. The electronics were well protected there. I mean, it's not weatherproof by any means, but there's enough cover to stop water getting in there and shorting and these sort of casual crashes when you're in a sort of wet environment. I should mention, this is where I had a stage 1 failsafe. As I come past here, it went on, and that sudden turn was the inputs I was giving to it. So, I mean, that's a fair distance for a tiny little quad. I could do better by pushing that antenna up better. So this was a lot of fun. It's got enough power to be able to, you know, fly around without using all the throttle, but when you push the throttle up, it's not going to go mad, which is pretty key to flying indoors. This is about as big as I'd go indoors because it starts getting tricky to fit it through doorways, and it's just a bit loud and obnoxious, really. So it's about compromise, really. This at 100mm will fly pretty nicely indoors, much better than I expected, actually. And these prop guards are fantastic. It just bounces off everything. I've not used turtle mode before, and this is sort of the reason I thought about this one is all enclosed. You flip it up, the props aren't touching. It'd be really good just to be able to sort of flip it over and flip it back again if you wanted to. So I might try that. But outdoors, it's, you know, it's not fantastic. I mean, if we compare it to something like this UAV 105, this is fantastic outdoors. Great range, great speed, but I wouldn't fly indoors because it's got too much explosive power there and the props aren't guided. I mean, you can do it, but again, compromise. Great outdoors, not so good indoors. Great indoors, not so good outdoors. And I think if you went up to the 115 or the 125, this would increase the ability outdoors, but you're looking at a bigger, more powerful thing indoors, which, you know, doesn't work quite as well. So, you know, that's down to your personal preference, really. I really like this. I mean, I wouldn't call it a brushless whoop by any means because it's bigger, but it fits around my house, and my house isn't huge. I mean, there's a few key things it got wrong. I really do think everything needs an OSD these days. It seems like every single board has them, and the Pico missing it is a bit of a shame because just I want to know when my battery's running out more than a beep when I'm in a different floor of the house somewhere else. And of course, that trying to get that USB in is quite comedy. Aside from that, the design's really good. It's so tough. That's what's really great. It's tough enough just to bounce off things and keep going, which is perfect for where you've got obstacles, either indoors, outdoors, or doing a mix of the both. Really good there. So yeah, this is the King Kong ET100, and if you want to check it out, please have a look at the link below. Meantime, I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.